Now then, 1967, the so-called Summer of Love, the height of the so-called hippie movement. Was it a movement? Did it move anything at all? I don't know. I was a bit young at the time, I suppose, but it does seem to me in retrospect that, given where things might have taken off to from there, that it fell flat, unfortunately. And this is 67. Considered its sort of pinnacle. It was all downhill from here in terms of the aspirations of the hippies and peace and love and all the rest of it. But anyway, hopefully my list sort of does reflect. It will reflect that period to some extent. It's going to get harder, this, actually. 1966 was pretty easy. 1967 is not too bad, because I've only got about maybe 20 or so albums from that period, because I didn't have any, obviously I was young, I didn't have any money to buy LPs in those days, and by the time I had any disposable income, it was we're talking in the era of the CD, so I only started buying records in 71 really, and it's going to get harder this as I work my way up to that, because I've only got 20 or 25 or so albums from some of these mid-60s years. I've got literally hundreds from each year in the 70s. So anyway, here we go. I'm going to have a go. It's only a bit of fun, cause a bit of conversation and light-hearted argument, hopefully. So I'll start with a couple that I don't tend to play from 1967 and just say why, just briefly. And these are artists who I really, really love. But first, the Four Tops, and I would never diss the Four Tops. I absolutely love the Four Tops. I love Levi Stubbs singing in particularly. And this is the album Reach Out from obviously 67. The title track Reach Out is absolutely marvellous, and that gets this album off to an absolute flying start. And there's some other brilliant tracks on it, particularly Standing in the Shadows of Love, and one or two others. But why don't I like it? Several reasons. One is they do some covers on here, like If I Were a Carpenter, Last Train to Clarksville, I'm a Believer, things like that, which probably Tamla's attempt to get the Four Tops, reach a sort of crossover mainstream white audience. Totally unnecessary commercial folly in my view. But the other reason is the cover. The cover makes me feel really queasy, uneasy when I look at it. I don't know, it's sort of cartoon effect of it just doesn't look right at all. Reminds me of Marmalade. I don't mean the band Marmalade, I mean you know what I mean. So I don't tend to listen to that, and I've got about 5 or 6 or 7 other Four Tops albums, mainly from the 70s, which are probably better as albums, but that's got some great tracks on it. The other one I don't play so much, even though the first 2 tracks on this are just, the title tracks, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, 1 and 2, which is the A side and the B side, are just unbelievable. They're just James Brown at his absolute best, and the band behind him, the famous Flames, just absolutely, at their peak, brilliant stuff. But the problem was the record company, they wanted to cash in. That had been a hit single. They wanted to cash in. They wanted to put an album out. Brown didn't have an album ready, so they just cobbled together some of his older stuff, and it feels like a cobbled together thing, which is a shame really, because I do love James Brown. But anyway, on to me top 10. I'll just get my notes in case I get out of order or anything. But my number 10 is a debut album. There's quite a lot of debut albums in this list, but my number 10 is a debut album from the Bee Gees. Morris, Robin, Barry Gibb, 3 brothers who emigrated to Australia as very young kids. Their family emigrated. They started making records over there in Australia, aged about 12 or something. But they were only young teenagers here when they came back to England to make their debut album. Robin and Barry Gibb wrote all the songs on this on this album. A lot of them are sort of pretty straight ahead pop. Some of them are sort of Beatlesque sort of. They were obviously very, very influenced by the Beatles. And some of them are sort of straying into the psychedelia mode. But what it does show is what great singers, songwriters, arrangers the Gibb brothers were, and it's a sort of a sign of the things that were to come from them. Great sort of psychedelia cover from the time. This is the artwork of Klaus Vormann, friend of the Beatles, also designed the Revolver album, played bass on many of the Beatles solo projects, and also ended up with Mann. But anyway, that's by the by. But that's the Bee Gees. Brilliant songs on here. New York Mining Disaster and In My Own Time. My two recommended songs if you want to pick one from that album. That's my number 10, the Bee Gees first. My number 9 is, I've got them all out of order, would you believe it? Bear with me. Yeah, what a voice, Ella Fitzgerald. This is Ella Fitzgerald backed by the Lou Levy Trio. And this is probably just vocal purity and perfection. The Lou Levy Trio, pretty sparse, just sort of jazz trio. Pretty much in the background, leaving loads of space for Ella Fitzgerald's just remarkable voice. And I'm not one normally for purity and perfection. In fact, I'm not one for vocal purity and perfection. For me, it's more about, is it authentic? Is it heartfelt? Is it true? Is it you know, what are the lyrics saying? But you just can't get away from this. It's gorgeous, gorgeous singing, and I credit it as my number 9 for that reason. My number 8 is another jazz album, but this is it's one you might not be familiar with. This is the jazz flautist or flute player Herbie Mann. Herbie Mann is New York, Jewish sort of background. Seen as one of the pioneers of world music. He toured a lot in Brazil, South America, South Africa. He played with and encouraged, enabled people from those countries to come together and access recording and performance opportunities. But this is his album Glory of Love, and I'm not sure how representative. I've got another Herbie Mann album there, which is a bit more. A little bit more left field than this, but this is very much mainstream. It's easy listening in many ways. It's very cinematic. I think half the songs on here you think they could be, you know, film soundtracks. They sound like film soundtracks. The other half sound like the intermission in the cinema. You know, the bit before you used to get bombarded with adverts all the time, and they used to play sort of background music in the intermission. It sounds like that, but it's lovely, it's soft, it's like just laying back on a soft pillow or something listening to this stuff. So I do play this a lot. This is Herbie Mann, Glory of Love, my number 8. My number 7, I'm talking about soft and nice and mellow. This is Donovan, and this is Donovan, early period Donovan. When he was, you know, more folky than sort of psychedelic. But this is Universal Soldier, the title track on here, which is a Buffy Sainte-Marie anti-war song, which I absolutely loved as a kid. I just love the sentiment in that song. But also some brilliant stuff. I love the track Turquoise, the Donovan track, and also the single Catch the Wind. And it's just a lovely, folky, easy, nice. It makes you feel good listening to this album. Donovan, Universal Soldier, my number 7. My number 6. You know, I talked about vocal purity. Well, this is just vocal, unbelievable perfection. I mean, Van Morrison's vocals are just out of this world. There's nothing like Van Morrison, and this was his, well, it was his debut album technically, although he sort of really tried to disown it because he'd been, in his words, duped into signing a contract with Bert Burns of Bang Records, and when his band Them broke up, and he'd gone over to America. Burns had flown him over, and Van thought he'd agreed to do a few singles and B-sides, but which included Brown Eyed Girl. which opens this album. But in the end, Bert Burns stuck this out without Van's knowledge. Van said he wanted to puke up when he seen the cover and how bad that was, and he just wasn't happy with the whole thing. He'd ceded all artistic control, if you like, to Bert Burns, and Morrison was absolutely furious about it. But having said all of that, this is not a bad album. This is Van Morrison, after all. There's some really good musicians. It's got a bluesy feel. First side on here is almost perfect. It includes Brown Eyed Girl, but the next two tracks, including the lengthy 10-11 minute TB Sheets, just evoke late 60s slum-ridden Notting Hill Gate, where Van was living at the time, in a really beautiful, well, not beautiful, in a really dark and atmospheric sort of way. Yeah, it just evokes that period of London long before gentrification was thought of. So, although Van didn't like it, I do, and I've got it as my number 6 in my 1967 list. My number 5, this is another debut album, but while the Gibb brothers were teenagers, Leonard Cohen was actually 33 when he produced this album, Songs of Leonard Cohen. He was already quite an established, well-known poet. He'd wanted to get into music, and he thought of getting into country music, but instead he eventually put some of his poems to a fairly sparse, sort of straightforward, but sort of unique musical backing, different. And it came up with this album, and when you listen to this album, it doesn't sound like a debut album, it sounds like a greatest hits album. Some of these songs are just so strong. Suzanne, So Long Marianne, Sisters of Mercy, etc. Just really unbelievable. I mean, Cohen said it took him 6 months to write Suzanne, and you know, it's just, yeah, I think it opened the way for what's possible lyrically, really, and set a really, really high bar for people to follow. But I've got it as my number 5, Leonard Cohen, Songs of Leonard Cohen. My number 4 is What a Voice. We've had Ella Fitzgerald, we've had Van Morrison, and now another one of the unique voices of the 20th century, Scott Walker. This is Scott Walker's debut solo album after he left after the Walker's brothers split, and this is Walker going off very much in his own direction, which he was to pursue relentlessly, right through to his death, and he seemed to get what's the word, further and further, you could say down his own rabbit hole, but further and further exploring some of the themes that he touches on, some of the sort of dark themes in this album. This is about a third of the songs are his own compositions, about a third are covers and some songs from films, and then another third his interpretations of his hero Jack Brel, the Belgian-French singer. But really great stuff, a significant debut album, and if you want to listen to 2 tracks, can I suggest 2 from this? Beautiful Scott Walker compositions, or Scott Engel compositions, Montague's Terrace in Blue, and Such a Small Love. Listen to those 2 tracks, gorgeous. So that's Scott Walker, Scott, my number 4. My number 3 is another debut album. These are nearly all debut albums. It was a year for people breaking new ground, really, and this was no exception. This is Pink Floyd, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. This is Pink Floyd pre-Dave Gilmour, so this was Syd Barrett's band. Syd Barrett, songwriter, lead guitar and vocals. Roger Waters was there on bass and vocals, Richard Wright on keys, and Nick Mason on drums. And this is chaotic, scary, edgy, whimsical in parts, mad in parts, brilliant stuff. Space rock, I don't know, some people call it the first space rock album. It's just, I mean, this is, you know, Pink Floyd obviously hugely respected, and I don't want to upset Pink Floyd fans or really question their, you know, their classic period albums, either side of Dark Side of the Moon. You know, they're great albums in their own way, but I don't tend to listen to them that much. I find them, I don't know, a little bit dull. I'm maybe over familiar or whatever, but I can go back to this one. This one just has that edge that I think it's something different. The two opening tracks on each side, Astronomy Domini and Interstellar Overdrive, give a real flavour of that, of what I'm talking about. So I've got it as my number 3, Syd Barrett's psychedelic masterpiece, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. My number 2, another debut album. This is The Doors. Again, scary, edgy, different. It's jazzy, it's got some classical overtones. I love Ray Manzarek's keyboard playing. I don't know whether I pronounced his second name right, but this was, it opens with Break On Through to the Other Side. Side 1 closes with the brilliant Light My Fire, and then at the end there's this epic 12-minute track called The End at the end of side 2, and it's different, but right from beginning to end, you know, it's a great album. It's a great debut album. It's possibly the Doors' best album. How many albums did they have? 6? They didn't have that many, did they? 5 or 6. I like LA Woman as well, but I do like this one, and I've got it as my number 2 from 1967, the Doors' debut album. So, my number 1. This is one of those albums that, I mean, I've talked about this type of album before where, you know, right from the opening note right through to the last bar of the last song, I don't know, it just feels to me you wouldn't want to change one thing, you wouldn't want to edit one thing, you wouldn't want to put anything in a different order. It just really hangs together as a work of art, and this is Love Forever Changes. So Arthur Lee's band, Arthur Lee, the lead singer and songwriter, guitarist, and it's Latin folky. Certainly more. This is their 3rd album. It's more folky than their first 2 albums. It's definitely psychedelic. It's and although lyrically it's dealing with some really dark stuff, mortality, the fact that, you know, although this is the summer of love, not all is love and peace. Certainly not either in Arthur Lee's own head or Arthur Lee's life. Suffering racism, and there was race riots going on in America. So it's a sort of, you know, a look at the other side of the summer of love, if you like. But for all that darkness, there is a lightness to the music that just makes this so listenable and accessible and enjoyable to listen to. There's a subtlety and a beauty about it. It's a brilliant album. My number 1 from 1967, Love Forever Changes. So that was 1967. As I say, it's going to get harder. 1968, obviously, next time. Hope you might join me. Cheers.